Chapter 3361, Greenland Frost Dragon. Cedric Diggory's performance was flawless. He finished in the shortest time yet and won the crowd's unanimous praise. All the judges gave him high marks, most of them 8 or 9, except for Karkaroff, who, with a sour scowl, begrudgingly handed in a 4. Cedric bowed calmly as thunderous applause followed him from the arena. A brilliant performance. Both champions from Hogwarts have shown extraordinary skill. Ludo Bagman cried, his voice bubbling with excitement. Now let us welcome the champion from Ouagadougou. Drums and rhythmic chanting swelled. A lithe, dark-skinned student from Ouagadougou sprang into the arena. She wore bright, simple robes and a painted totem of a bygone bird beast across her face. Her eyes were keen as an eagle's. The instant she touched the dueling monument, the atmosphere shifted. A bone-deep chill swept the stadium. The warm hills dissolved into an endless kingdom of ice and snow. Towering pillars of ice rose from the ground. The earth became a sheet of hard frost, and a cutting wind whipped up clouds of glittering ice dust. The leaden sky let little light through, everything bathed in a deathly blue-white. Deep within a nest built of ice blocks, the Ouagadougou champion's opponent revealed itself, a Greenland frost dragon. This beast was nothing like the fire drakes most wizards pictured. Its bulk was heavy, scales pale and thick like ancient glacier ice, worn by the ages. Its wings were short and awkward, indicating it rarely took to the air, and its head was a fearsome mash of lizard and mammoth, tusks jutted like lethal icicles. Its gaze, an icy blue, seemed almost dead. Every breath rasped out visible white frost. Merlin's beard, Bagman's voice trembled, whether from the cold or from shock, it was hard to tell. A Greenland frost dragon, a rare subspecies. It doesn't breathe fire. It exhales a freezing blast that can solidify anything instantly. Its scales are harder than steel, and it resists most fire magic. The Ouagadougou champion is in serious trouble. The frost dragon gave a deep, resonant roar and fixed its cold eyes on the challenger. The Ouagadougou student did not flinch. She swayed, moving with a rhythm that seemed older than words, and began a deep, pulsing chant. The totem on her face glowed faintly, and then her body changed. Feathers erupted along her limbs, arms and legs lengthened, hands and feet sharpened into hooked talons. Though her head kept a human outline, it had merged with an eagle's power and poise, forming a mythic bird-human form. Human transfiguration, Bagman cried in astonishment. My word, Ouagadou's human transfiguration, a masterful and rare form. I haven't seen such a thing since the Quidditch World Cup 16 years ago. The birdwoman beat her wings, and a gust of air flung up a spray of ice shards. She took to the air, intending to use her speed and agility to avoid the dragon's freezing breath and heavy strikes, and to snatch the golden egg from above the nest. It was a sound tactic. The Greenland frost dragon arched its neck and blew a pale, freezing mist, but she twisted and flipped through it with hard-earned skill, a streak of black against the blizzard, closing on the egg. As she dove, talons outstretched, the dragon revealed its own cunning. Its huge tail, like a long frozen serpent, rose with shocking speed and struck under her with a sickening impact. The force shattered her balance. Her transfiguration faltered. She cried out as her body spun like a broken kite. The tail strike would have been bad enough, but the dragon was not finished. Its ice-blue eyes locked on the tumbling form, and its maw opened wide. From it poured a blinding torrent of freezing breath, an icy waterfall of blue-white light, straight into the space she passed through. Crack! The sound of ice forming snapped through the air. Mid-dive, the Ouagadougou champion was encased in a shell of ice, frozen in her last terrified pose, a perfect statue of frost. The dragon lunged forward, jaws clamping down, and the ice sculpture exploded with a thunderous crash, shards flying in a glittering cascade. The protective charm around the arena triggered at once. At the moment, the attack should have been fatal. The charm spat the champion out of the arena and away to safety. Still, the fragments of ice that rained down told a brutal tale of just how narrowly she had escaped. For a long heartbeat, the stadium was utterly silent, except for the keening wind. The Ouagadougou champion's daring gambit had been phenomenal, but the dragon's merciless counterstrike had been worse. Bagman's voice came strained and small. Oh, no. The Ouagadougou champion. She failed. The frost dragon's attack was too severe. That exquisite human transfiguration couldn't withstand such a cold. Let us all hope she's safe. A soft glow from the protective enchantment enveloped the field. Slowly, the frost dragon and its icy realm dissolved back into nothing as the duel reset. The defeat of the Ouagadougou champion cast a shadow over the arena, but the competition went on. Ludo Bagman forced his cheerfulness and in his booming voice announced, "Let us thank the Ouagadougou champion for her extraordinary courage and wish her a speedy recovery. Now, let us welcome our next challenger, the champion from Ouagadougou, Kamiri Sanchez." A lean boy stepped from the waiting area. He had bronze skin and a thick mop of black hair, wearing Ouagadougou's distinctive leather armor and clutching a wand that glowed faintly like a fishbone. With a solemn expression, he placed his hand on the dueling pillar, and the familiar burning sensation washed over him. Instantly, the arena shifted into a heart-stopping volcanic landscape, dark red, porous rock, steaming fissures, the acrid tang of sulfur in the air. In the scorched center lay the same terrifying creature Harry Potter had once faced, a Hungarian horntail. Its obsidian-like scales and brassy dorsal spikes gleamed, its vertical yellow pupils burned with sulphurous light. It was more agitated than before, its thick tail lashing the ground and gouging shallow pits. "It's a Hungarian horntail again." Bagman's voice carried a note of tension. "It seems this most vicious dragon is destined to face multiple challengers tonight. Champion Sanchez, good luck." Luck did not favor Sanchez. Early in the match, during a desperate dodge, he failed to evade the horntail's sudden cone of fire. The scorching flames swept over his body. A piercing scream cut through the arena. Protective charms teleported him off the field almost immediately, but everyone had seen the left side of his body badly burned. The scent of charred flesh lingered. He was the first champion in the tournament to suffer such severe injuries, and beyond the infirmary's capabilities, he had to be rushed to St. Apphori, Mungo's hospital for magical maladies and injuries. The crowd fell into a heavy silence. The back-to-back disasters had dampened the earlier excitement. "This is truly unfortunate," Bagman said, his voice heavier than before. "Let us all wish Champion Sanchez a speedy recovery. Now the competition continues. Next up." When the final champion at last retrieved the golden egg from a furious Hebridean black, the arena's magical tableau faded. The floating battleground slowly subsided, and the platform returned to plain stone. Ludo Bagman came to the center, his earlier grin dimmed, his tone more solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice, amplified by spellwork, rang through the venue. "I announce that the first event of the quarterfinals has officially concluded." Applause rose, but it was not as unalloyed as at the opening. There was cheering for those who had succeeded, and shock at how brutal the contest had been. "As you can see," Bagman continued, "the elimination rate for this first event was very high. Of our original 16 champions, 5 failed to complete the challenge. According to the rules, once eliminated, they are ineligible for further matches." He paused to let the news sink in. "Therefore, 11 champions have advanced to the second event. They are Hogwarts, Harry Potter, Cedric Diggory, Durmstrang, Victor Krum, Beauxbatons, Fleur Delacour, Ilvermorny, Spud Kowalski, Nina Clarice, Ouagadougou, Kelly Talloway, Ouagad Biola Adesinji, Castella Bruxo, Diego Rodriguez, Kunlun, Jingshe Quiet Snow, and the final qualifier, Shu Ye. As Bagman read each name, cheers erupted from the stands. The arena thundered its congratulations for the 11 who had overcome the challenge with skill and courage. Immediately, the magical display in front of the judges' table showed the final scores for each qualifying champion. The crowd could see that some blatantly low scores and a few anomalously high ones had been excluded from the tally. Bagman's face brightened with a touch of theatricality, as if remembering something. "Oh, that's right! Now that the scoring segment is complete, please allow me, on behalf of the organizing committee, to announce an important adjustment to the scoring rules." He smiled and scanned the room. At the suggestion of our esteemed Hogwarts professor, Mr. Greengrass, and after careful deliberation, the organizing committee has decided that each champion's final score will be determined by removing their single lowest score and their single highest score, and then calculating the average of the remaining marks. He looked toward the professor's table, where Professor Sagres sat. Sagres inclined his head in a calm nod. This measure aims to ensure fairness and objectivity in the scoring, preventing individual extreme scores from unduly influencing the results of our champions' efforts. I personally believe this is a very fair and wise decision." The crowd paused, then burst into enthusiastic applause and cheers. Many in the audience recognized the point of the change immediately. It effectively curtailed Karkaroff's habit of giving maliciously low marks and his shameless favoritism toward his own students. "Well done! That should have been done a long time ago." Voices called out from the stands. At the professor's table, Igor Karkaroff went ashen. His fists curled beneath the table until the knuckles whitened. All his previous attempts to suppress rivals' scores now seemed wasted, exposed as foolishness by a simple tweak to the rules. He wanted to protest, to object, but faced with the heads of schools and numerous ministry officials, any outcry would only make him look worse. He could only emit a nearly choking growl and glare venomously in Sagres's direction. Sagres, sitting primly at the table, caught his eye. Karkaroff quickly and awkwardly averted his gaze and tried to look unconcerned. Sagres smiled, nodded once, and let out a short, dry chuckle. "Heh!" Ludo Bagman quickly brought things under control, pressing his hands down. Once the cheers died away, he flashed his contagiously wide smile and announced in a booming voice, "Thank you to all the judges for your hard work, and congratulations to the champions who have advanced. The smoke from the first task has cleared, but the challenges are far from over. I can tell you now that the second task will be an even more extraordinary trial, one that will test your wisdom." He paused for effect, letting the suspense build. The second task will take place after the Christmas holidays. The exact time and place will be announced later. And as for the key clue for the second task, he drew the words out, his gaze sweeping over the champions clutching their golden eggs. "It's hidden inside the golden egg you hold." Yes, champions, what you have is not only your pass to the next stage, but also the key to unlocking the next riddle. How you decipher the secret of the egg will require thought and ingenuity. I suggest you try to interpret it before Christmas and prepare, because once the Christmas bells ring, the real challenges will begin. The announcement caused a ripple of murmurs among the champions. Everyone glanced down at the heavy golden egg in their arms, curiosity written on their faces. "All right, ladies and gentlemen, the first task of the Triwizard Tournament has concluded successfully. Thank you for your attention and support." After Bagman's final words, the audience began to file out in an orderly fashion, guided by prefects and professors. Lively conversations filled the halls. People replayed the thrilling competition, speculated about the secret locked in the golden eggs, and discussed the satisfying new scoring rules. In the days that followed, Hogwarts settled back into its routine, but it was subtly different. Classes went on, yet many unfamiliar faces now filled the rooms. Durmstrang students, wrapped in heavy fur cloaks, sat quietly and solemnly in the back rows of Charms and Defense Against the Dark Arts. Beauxbaton's girls, elegant and poised, brightened History of Magic and Herbology with their soft French accents. Students from Ilvermorny, Ouagadougou, Castellabruxo, and other schools took turns sitting in on classes according to their interests. The interschool exchange produced a delightful effect. In Professor Flitwick's Charms class, pupils from different schools engaged in friendly debates over pronunciation and wand work for a particular spell. In Professor Sprout's greenhouses, students from Castellabruxo spoke knowledgeably about tropical magical plants, opening others' eyes. Even in Professor Snape's chilly underground potions classroom, faces in various uniforms frowned over complex recipes. The castle corridors echoed with different colored uniforms and a chorus of accents and languages, bringing an unprecedented liveliness to the ancient halls. There were still occasional frictions and rivalries, but after the recent ordeal with the dragon, a subtle camaraderie had begun to take root. The next morning, the winter sun slanted through the high windows of the staff room, casting patches of light across the table. The warm scent of black tea hung in the air. The excitement of the previous day had faded, and several professors took a moment's respite between lessons. "I must say," Professor McGonagall remarked, lifting her cup, a rare note of admiration in her voice, "the floating arena is an extraordinary piece of magic. It not only simulated those environments perfectly, its stability and load-bearing capacity exceeded all expectations." "Absolutely, Minerva," Professor Flitwick chimed, nearly vibrating with excitement. In the whole history of magic, there are only a handful of creations that match its complexity and functionality. It's a monumental achievement, a true integration of modern enchantments and ancient runes. That's why the headmasters and visiting students praised it so highly, Professor Sprout said with a smile. We put a great deal of thought into those runic circuits. Humph. Snape held his teacup, eyes fixed on the dark surface as if checking it for poison. Doesn't resisting clumsy offensive magic stand as its most basic function? The professors who had worked on the arena exchanged knowing looks. The structure embodied a great deal of their collective labor and ingenuity. Moody's magical eye swiveled toward Flitwick. Phileas, he said, what I'm most curious about is its protective enchantments. That Wagado student was badly burned yesterday, yet the arena managed to get him out at the last moment. Flitwick's face lit up. Ah, that's the key point, Alastor. It involves a very sophisticated monitoring system. A monitoring system? Moody frowned. I haven't heard that term. Nor had I, until Sargeras mentioned it once, Flitwick admitted with a smile. It may be a Muggle phrase. In essence, it does more than mechanically measure the impact of an attack. It continuously tracks a champion's vital signs. If an assault pushes those signs past a dangerous threshold, the system will trigger an immediate teleport, regardless of whether the attack is still ongoing. Moody listened intently and chimed in. So even if someone's hit with a stupefy, if their vitals drop sharply, they're considered out? They don't have to wait for, say, a dragon's teeth to finish the job? Precisely. We accounted for every eventuality. Of course, the protective enchantments were carefully calibrated before competition, Flitwick added. The two of them went on, one outlining extreme combat scenarios from a practical defense perspective, and the other explaining the spellwork and magical contracts involved. Their voices carried on an easy professional argument as the other professors listened and contributed. While the staff discussed the arena, Sargeras had left Hogwarts. He now stood in front of a London townhouse, the residence of Barty Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. He stared at the closed windows in the quiet courtyard, brows creasing as he keenly caught an unusual strain in the air. Sargeras stood before the silent mansion and knocked on the heavy wooden door with his knuckles. The sound carried down the empty corridor. After a moment's pause, a chain slid back and the door cracked open. Barty Crouch stood in the gap. He looked far more haggard than the last time Sargeras had seen him at Hogwarts, sunken eyes, hair in disorder. But his gaze was sharp with a paranoid vigilance that bordered on madness. When he realized the person at his door was a Hogwarts professor he didn't recognize, astonishment flitted across his face and hardened instantly into ruthless resolve. He didn't ask a question. A wand thrust through the opening and a dazzling green light shot toward Sargeras' chest. The strike was sudden and vicious, full of murderous intent. Sargeras had expected it. He shifted his body a fraction, calm and deliberate, letting the spell flash past him. With a casual flick of his wand, he shut the door that had been ajar and, with a single precise motion, snapped the wand in Barty Crouch's hand. His expression unchanged, Sargeras pointed his wand at the closed door and said, Alahomora. The lock clicked and the door opened. Barty Crouch's body lay on the doorstep. He had driven the broken wand through his own throat. Blood pooled on the floor, his eyes fixed and wide. Sargeras stepped inside, cast Incarcerus over the corpse as a precaution, then began to examine the house. The sitting room was neat. 2 styles of teacup sat on the coffee table. One still showed flecks of potion at the bottom. 2 coats hung on the rack, one large with the Ministry of Magic emblem, the other much smaller and smelling strongly of sweat. Upstairs he found a bedroom warded by a powerful shielding charm. Inside the room was untidy, rumpled sheets, a faint lingering odor of potion, and strange winding crawl marks in the dust on the floor. After confirming no one else was there, he returned downstairs to the body. Suicide. Imperio? Sargeras murmured, crouching. He raised his wand and held it over Crouch's cold forehead. A thin black mist swirled about the tip, whispers of the dead. It was forbidden magic, binding a fragment of a recently departed soul long enough for a brief, limited exchange. Answers were sketchy and partial, but sometimes they were the only way to pry truth loose. His voice was low and chilling as he asked, Were you a follower of Lord Voldemort? An invisible ripple passed through the air. Crouch's body twitched almost imperceptibly. A faint voice sounded in Sargeras's mind. No. Sargeras's gaze sharpened. He pressed on. Are you my enemy? No. Were you controlled, Imperio, by Lord Voldemort or a Death Eater? Yes. The response carried humiliation and pain, and that confirmed Sargeras's suspicion. Crouch had been forced. Did you put Harry Potter's name into the Goblet of Fire? Sargeras asked bluntly. No. The denial was clear. He asked, did you steal Snape's potion ingredients to brew Polyjuice Potion? The black mist conveyed nothing but a blank silence, confusion, absence. No response usually meant the soul fragment had no awareness of the matter. Sargeras frowned. If Crouch had been made to steal ingredients, his soul should remember. The lack of recollection suggested he had not been the one to enter Snape's storeroom at all. He changed tack. Were you ever in Snape's potion storeroom before the tournament? No. The refusal was firm. The answers clashed with what the Marauder's map had shown. The name Barty Crouch had appeared in Snape's potion storeroom. If the man who'd been there wasn't Barty Crouch Sr., then there was only one other possibility, another Barty Crouch. Your son, Barty Crouch Jr., is not dead, he asked. Yes. The admission came with complicated feelings. Disgust, a grim sense of responsibility. The black mist shuddered. The last of the held vitality drained from Crouch's body. The soul fragment dissolved into smoke beneath Sargeras's wand. The connection ended. Sargeras straightened, his face grave. The fragments fit into a disturbing picture. Barty Crouch Jr. was alive and very likely the infiltrator at Hogwarts. He had almost certainly put Harry's name into the Goblet of Fire, and to do it, had used Polyjuice Potion, hence the need to steal ingredients from Snape's storeroom. It seemed Barty Crouch Sr., the upright ministry official, had once found a way to free or cover for his son, and had paid for it. In the end, he had been killed by Voldemort's machinations. Was Barty Crouch Jr. still at Hogwarts now? Who had he been disguised as? Had he worked alone? The questions crowded Sargeras's mind, along with the image of that snake and the part it might have played. There were no more answers to be found in the quiet house. He had to return to Hogwarts at once. 365, Chapter 365, Requesting the Marauder's Map. Professor Sagres Greengrass apparated back to Hogwarts the moment his thoughts cleared. Suspicion clouded his mind. There were too many possible culprits. Karkaroff's odd behavior, the strangeness of Snape's storeroom, Moody's perfectly timed appearances, the eager Ludo Bagman, and the visiting heads and students from other schools. He couldn't investigate each lead at once. He needed concrete proof, a tool that could pierce every disguise and reveal the truth. He thought of Harry's Marauder's map, which Moody had taken. Without hesitation, he went to the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, but the door was shut. Moody wasn't there, probably off teaching. Greengrass hesitated a moment, then headed down the corridor toward the staff common room. On the way, he met Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood, and Astoria Greengrass walking together toward the dueling platform, chatting excitedly. Good afternoon, Professor Greengrass. Ginny, sharp-eyed as ever, spotted him first and fell silent, greeting him with respect. Luna, wide-eyed and curious, peered at him and said in her clear voice, Good afternoon, Professor. Astoria offered a sweet, composed smile and bowed slightly. Good afternoon, Professor. Good afternoon, Miss Weasley, Miss Lovegood, Miss Greengrass, he replied with a small nod. Are you heading to the dueling platform? Yes, Professor. Astoria answered with a smile. We heard Professor Moody is giving a practical lesson this afternoon. It's supposed to be intense. Lots of people have gone to watch, and we didn't want to miss it. Practical? Greengrass felt a stir of interest. Sounds worth seeing. I'm heading that way myself. Come with me. They readily agreed, quieting their chatter and falling in behind him as he led them to the floating platform. Crossing the suspension bridge woven from vines, they could hear Moody's hoarse voice and the crack of defensive spells. When they arrived, the stands were already full, not just Hogwarts students, but pupils in Durmstrang furs, Beauxbaton silks, and other unfamiliar robes. Every eye was fixed on the center of the platform. Moody stood there, scarred and severe, his magical eye whirring in its socket as it scanned the crowd. His good eye focused on a nervous Hufflepuff boy who was practically trembling. Greengrass stayed at the edge of the platform and watched as Moody limped among the students, barking corrections at their posture and wand work. His teaching was blunt and uncompromising, but effective. Vigilance. Always be vigilant. Moody's voice, amplified by magic, carried to every corner. The enemy won't wait while you struggle with a spell. A dark wizard won't care about dueling etiquette. He flicked his wand and a fast, non-lethal jet of light shot toward the Hufflepuff. The boy scrambled to dodge, clumsy and too slow, and was struck to his knees. "See that?" Moody growled, wooden leg thudding forward. "Your reaction's too slow. In a real fight, you'd be down and at their mercy. Grip your wand. Keep your feet moving. Don't stand there like a log." He turned to the rest and thundered. "I'll say it again. Defense against the dark arts isn't a performance. It's a survival skill. It's what gets you home alive when you meet real darkness." Then he demonstrated a rather unconventional offensive spell, delivered with seasoned technique and tricky angles. Many in the stands gasped in admiration. It wasn't until the bell rang that Greengrass strode forward. "Professor Moody," he said calmly. Moody turned, his living eye fixed on Greengrass, while the magical one spun, taking measure. "Sargeras," he grunted. "Something wrong?" "A small matter," Greengrass replied, getting straight to the point. "You confiscated a map from Potter, the one that shows everyone in the castle. I need to borrow it for a short while." Moody's single eye narrowed, but he did not deny it. "Yes, the Marauder's map. It's with me. Why? There are circumstances I must verify. The map might give a unique insight." Moody watched him a long moment. The spinning of the magical eye slowed as if considering. Finally, he nodded. "All right, that thing does have use. I'll fetch it from my office." "Thank you," Greengrass said. Moody's face softened only slightly. "But remember, it's still Potter's property. I'm only holding it. If you want to use it, you'd better ask the boy first." Greengrass agreed without hesitation. "Of course." Moody's magical eye swept the dispersing crowd and fixed on Harry Potter, who was about to leave with Ron and Hermione. "Potter!" Moody barked. "Come here!" Harry hesitated, confused for a moment, especially when he saw Professor Greengrass standing beside Moody, which made his heart skip. He exchanged a quick look with Ron and Hermione and then hurried over. "Professor Moody? Professor Greengrass?" Chapter 366. Shocking Change. Mad-Eye Moody didn't beat around the bush. His normal eye fixed on Harry, as if drilling into him, his voice low but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Displeasure dripped from every word. "Potter, I distinctly told you not to breathe a word about what happened that night to anyone." Harry's face went scarlet. Shame and embarrassment washed over him. His eyes flicked away, and he stumbled over his words. He had told Professor Greengrass, but he had never expected to be confronted like this. I mean, he began, but the words died in his throat. Moody grunted at Harry's flustered expression and after a moment seemed to decide not to press the matter. He shifted to the reason he had called Harry over. "Right. Business. Professor Greengrass wants to borrow your Marauder's map." He indicated Sargeras standing nearby. "The map's with me now, but it's yours. Are you willing to lend it to Professor Sargeras?" The change of subject was a relief to Harry. He looked at Sargeras, calm at his side, and without hesitation nodded. "No problem, Professor. If Professor Greengrass needs it, of course." Harry's quick assent showed how much he trusted Sargeras. Moody seemed mildly surprised by the ease of it. He raised his bushy brow and glanced at Sargeras. "Looks like you're more trusted by the students than I am, their defense against the dark arts Professor Sargeras." He muttered with a half-smile. He clapped Harry on the shoulder, lowering his voice. "Keep your mouth shut, kid. Don't go telling everyone everything, especially before you know the full picture. It's dangerous." Harry nodded awkwardly, stung by the rebuke, and moved to join Ron and Hermione. While Moody had been admonishing Harry, Sargeras had stood to the side, patient and composed. A faint, silver sheen flickered in his deep eyes. He quietly reached out with legitimacy toward Mad-Eye Moody's mind. He needed to confirm whether this Moody really was as righteous as he claimed, or even whether he was the real Alastair Moody. Almost immediately, his probe slammed into a wall, a cold, hard occlumency barrier. It fought back with a fierce, defiant will, throwing Sargeras's subtle intrusion off. The attempt returned nothing. This level of occlumency was more than ordinary. It bore the vigilance of someone seasoned in combat, an instinctive hatred of uninvited mental entry. Sargeras's eyes narrowed. His legitimacy had failed. Moody's normal eye swung to Sargeras at that instant. The magical eye stopped its restless rotation and seemed to fix on him. Instead of anger, Moody's scarred face softened into a mocking, knowing smile. "Humph," he grunted aloud. "Sargeras, I'd advise you not to try and stab an old Auror in the head. Apart from dark wizards and traps, there's not much in there you'd want, and uninvited guests aren't welcome." He called the maneuver out, bringing the silent confrontation into the open. Sargeras stayed composed, nodding slightly. "My apologies, Professor Moody. Sometimes it's hard to control," he said with measured calm. Then, as if to smooth things over, he shifted the topic. "By the way, I still want to thank you for recommending Mr. Flonkin. Locatus is very pleased with the eye, powerful functions, unique sight." A twitch passed over Moody's face. His magical eye rotated with the motion. "Small matter," he muttered dismissively. "That old man Flonkin's craftsmanship is fine, if expensive. Good to hear it's useful." The casual expression froze on Moody's face like ice. Harry, having taken a few steps away, felt the atmosphere behind him snap taut, as if the air had coagulated. He turned instinctively. Without warning, Moody thrust out his hand, and his wand shot forward like a striking serpent, red light bursting from its tip with a raw, hoarse shout. "Bombarda!" He didn't aim at a single person, but at the center of the cluster of students still lingering, an attack meant to cause mass casualties. At the same instant, Sargeras reacted. The wand he'd just been given tapped the ground with a sharp motion. Boom! The earth in front of Moody rose in a jagged, bulging wall of stone, intercepting the bombarda. The explosion was deafening as the wall shattered into flying chunks and choking smoke. Though the main force was stopped, debris and the shockwave toppled several nearby students. Screams and cries of pain filled the air. The assault wasn't over. As the smoke swirled, a blinding, sinister green bolt, Avada Kedavra, slashed through the haze toward Sargeras from an unexpected angle. Sargeras's hand twitched. A fragment of flying stone leapt up as if alive, twisted and reshaped on the spot into a crude shield that barely took the hit. Bang! The green light struck, and the improvised shield was shredded as if cut by Diffindo, but it absorbed the fatal curse. The green dissipated. From Moody's sudden strike to Sargeras's twin defenses, raising the stone wall and then stopping Avada Kedavra, the whole sequence took no more than 2 seconds. Everyone on and around the platform who'd witnessed it stood frozen, faces white with fear and disbelief. Mad-Eye Moody, attacking students, unleashing an unforgivable curse on another professor in broad daylight? Sargeras didn't immediately retaliate. He planted his feet, robes stirring from the residual magic, and stared through the settling smoke at Moody across from him. Moody had lowered his wand too. He stood breathing hard, his normal eye shadowed with complicated darkness, while the magical eye spun wildly. The usual belligerence and paranoid edge were gone from his scarred face. What remained was a cold, analytical scrutiny that made every onlooker's heart race. The frozen standoff lasted only a moment. The gloom in Moody's eyes snapped into something far worse, madness. He had realized Sargeras was an insurmountable obstacle, so he resolved to make as much trouble as possible to cover his escape. "Reducto," he barked. "Bombarda!" "Lapiforce!" He roared, waving his wand not at Sargeras but at the terrified students, casting indiscriminately as he moved. Sargeras's expression hardened. His wand flashed. Stone walls rose from the ground and earthen shields sprang up, intercepting the curses aimed at the pupils. Explosions answered in rapid succession, debris raining down, the arena dissolving into chaos. Using that distraction, Moody spun and pointed his wand at the dueling monument in the arena's center. He'd been told exactly what it did and how to break it by Professor Flitwick. "Diffindo!" he cried. Several sharp cutting curses struck the key runes on the monument. Ancient carvings spidered with cracks, the light within sputtered and flared. Moody laughed, wild and triumphant, and blasted the monument's base with 4 more Bombarda spells. Boom, boom, boom. With a series of deafening detonations, the monument couldn't withstand the assault. After a violent, earth-shuddering tremor, it exploded. Countless fragments of stone, charged with wild, untamed magic, shot outward. At the same instant, the space that had been containing the arena's summoned creatures lost its balance. Awoo! Roar! Earth-shaking roars split the air. Dragons, some that hadn't yet been sent away after the contest, solidified into massive living shapes, as if beasts breaking their cages. Enraged by sudden freedom, they began to spew flame without restraint. Other creatures poured through the ruptured rift. Several subspecies of trolls charged, howling and brandishing clubs. A feathered, multicolored serpent spread its wings and slipped into a student's pocket. A venomous horned beast pawed the ground, snorting and ready to gore. The floating arena became a riotous hell of magic and fury. Sargeras's face tightened. He had to protect the students, subdue the rampaging monsters, and keep an eye on the culprit. He darted among the chaos, shielding and hauling pupils to safety, and whenever he could, he struck back. A silent cutting curse, like an invisible blade, flew for Moody's throat. Moody's battle sense was ruthless. At the last instant, he jerked his head aside. Shh! Blood sprayed. One ear was sheared off clean at the base, but he avoided a mortal wound. His face twisted into pain, but he made no sound as if the loss had no right to slow him. He raised his wand again. Bombarda! Sargeras had already been forcing creatures back. He'd levitated Malfoy and Goyle to the edge and fired a repelling charm at a Peruvian viper tooth that was about to breathe fire near them. Moody, seeing that Sargeras would not stand by while students were endangered, aimed for something else. Avada Kedavra, the killing curse shot for Ron, who stood before Harry. The viper tooth, knocked back by Sargeras's charm, flew into the path of the curse. Scales burst and dragon blood spat. The enormous beast's resistance to magic saved its life. For a moment it survived, roaring as it flipped and reared, ready to belch flame at those in front of it. Then a flash of red lanced through the air. Crimson Rend! A piercing, lightning-fast spell streaked toward Moody's chest. In a split second, Moody shoved the viper tooth between himself and the spell to shield himself. Crash! The creature disintegrated into a steaming pool of blood the instant the crimson light hit. Hot dragon plasma drenched Moody's robes and skin. He stood there, soaked in gore, and laughed, a low, maniacal sound, his remaining eye glittering as its magical iris twitched. He had Harry in his sights. Stupefy! The stunning curse threaded through a gap in the dragon fire and struck Harry in the back. Harry didn't even have time to turn. His vision went black, and he fell forward, limp. "Harry!" Hermione and Ron cried, but their shouts were swallowed by the beast's bellows and the thud of destruction. Moody moved on without hesitation. Bombarda! He sent more explosions into the crowd to keep Sargeras occupied. Sargeras split his attention, racing to separate students from danger. He managed to save several, though it was barely controlled panic. In one frantic interval, Moody's wand flashed again. Accio! The unconscious Harry flew like a puppet across the battlefield and landed in Moody's blood-smeared hands. The man, Moody's one good eye glaring, the other still whirring, shot a triumphant look at Sargeras. With a sharp snap of movement amid dragons' roars and trolls' howls, the man holding Harry apparated away. Only a whirl of out-of-control magical creatures, a cluster of shaken students, and Sargeras remained in the arena. Moody, Barty Crouch, as some would later realize, had succeeded. He'd created maximum chaos, taken his target, and vanished. Sargeras's gaze lingered on the spot where they'd gone for less than half a second before he tore it away. Pursuit would be pointless now. Worse, several dragons had broken completely free. The Hungarian horntail and the opali threw their great wings and caught hot thermals, lifting suddenly into the sky. Their target was no longer just the arena, but the whole of Hogwarts and the scattering students below. If they escaped the arena proper, the consequences would be catastrophic. He made a quick decision. His wand moved at a blur, aimed at the fractured dueling monument. Reparo, powerful, meticulous magic gathered the shattered stones and seamed them back together as if time were reversing. The ancient runes glowed once more. The monument reconstituted itself with astonishing speed. That alone wasn't enough. Its core control matrices had been deliberately destroyed. Sargeras began to chant complex, archaic incantations, and silver light spilled from his wand tip like a weaving thread, wrapping the repaired monument. He forced the broken restraining and protective magics back together, rebuilding, binding, and reasserting control over the arena. A giant, translucent shield of magic shot up from the steel, slamming toward closure to reseal the entire arena. A Welsh green dragon's breath slammed into the not-quite-closed barrier, sending violent ripples across its surface. At the same time, the professors and heads of school who had sensed the disturbance finally arrived. When they saw dragons beating their wings and spewing fire above the floating arena and the chaos unfolding below, every face went pale. Merlin. Professor McGonagall whispered. Students were terrified. Some collapsed, some ran for the castle, some stared in frozen horror at the monstrous figures circling the arena, and others watched the butchery below as if it belonged to a prehistoric wilderness. The dragon's long-suppressed rage had been unleashed. They attacked everything and began to hunt. A Hungarian horntail pounced viciously on a smaller Swedish shortsnout, tearing into it with claws and fangs. The Greenland ice frost dragon, relying on size and strength, clamped down on an agitated venomous tentacula. Its bite snapped the creature's spine, and the dragon swallowed it whole. The trolls released as advanced assessment targets became the most tragic prey, defenseless before the dragons. Some were instantaneously cremated by dragonfire, filling the air with the sickly smell of roasted troll. Others were frozen by the ice frost dragon's breath and shattered into shards by more dragons. The scene was chaotic, bloody, and primeval. Sargeras stepped forward a few paces and bent to pick up Barty's ear. "All students, get away from the arena. Prefects, professors, organize the students back to the castle, immediately." His voice was cold and steady. Authority in every syllable calmed the panic just enough for order to form. While barking commands and coordinating with the arriving heads of school to establish a defensive line, he drew intricate trajectories through the air with his wand. The runes on the dueling stele flared with a blinding light, like a spell newly cast. The repair had completed. Sargeras breathed out, and looking at the dragons and enchanted beasts still rampaging in the arena, a hard light passed through his eyes. He traced a perfect circle around himself with his wand. Pale magical flames burst from him as if a dormant volcano had finally erupted. The flames widened into a surging annular wave that engulfed the entire arena. Every student still within its radius was surrounded by a brilliant white light, and amid cries of alarm, instantly teleported to the arena's edge by the protective enchantments. The creatures and dragons were likewise consumed by white radiance and forced back within the arena. The freshly repaired confinement magic drove itself to full power. The transparent barrier snapped shut, and the disaster was contained, except for one massive figure that resisted. The Greenland ice frost dragon, nearly impervious to heat, steamed with dense white cold air. It tore a gap through the pale flames, rearing its icicle-studded head and condensing a ghastly skeletal white mist deep in its throat. Sargeras's eyes narrowed. He swung his wand from ground to sky and unleashed a great spiraling shockwave. The spiral slammed into the dragon like an abyssal maw, a crushing force that distorted the air itself. The ice frost dragon screamed. The impact hurled its enormous body across the arena and disrupted its half-formed ice breath. It crashed like a broken puppet, scattering ice and dust. It tried to rise, but Sargeras followed up instantly. Chaotic explosion. A thick beam of spelllight, flickering with a blood-red glow, struck its head dead center. The explosion was deafening and far more violent than anything before. A crimson arcane maelstrom swallowed the dragon's head, and a piercing white light enveloped its ravaged body, forcing it back inside the repaired enclosure. But the four dragons that had first taken to the sky had already flown beyond the arena's range. Their shadows swept over the castle. Their roars made windows vibrate. As the heads of school urgently debated countermeasures, Sargeras did something that left everyone stunned. He stepped forward, raised his wand, and pointed at the heavens. Meteor summon! The clouds above seemed to tear open. The sky exploded with a roar as a blazing, world-ending meteor fell, screaming down like a sentence from the end of the world. Panic swept through the crowd. Even Dumbledore, everybody, felt infinitesimally small. People crouched instinctively as if the world itself would be annihilated. Sargeras's black robes snapped around him. As the meteor streaked down, he extended his wand and tapped the blazing stone in midair. With a cracking sound, it split, not into a scatter of burning fragments, but into four slightly smaller, still flaming meteorites. They stretched into elongated shapes and, trailing tails of fire, became massive, spear-like projectiles. As if alive, they shot off in 4 directions toward the dragons that flaunted their power high above, dead on in their aim. Roars of despair ripped through the clouds. Then 4 clean, metallic-sounding impacts rang out. The flaming spears pierced the dragons precisely. Each beast went limp and dropped from the sky. The 4 dragons crashed into an open area at the edge of the forbidden forest, sending up a sheet of dust and debris. In an instant, the aerial threat was gone. A stunned silence fell. People slowly stood and stared at the ember showers from the meteor and the 4 vast impact craters smoking beside the forest. The fallen dragons lay motionless in the wreckage. All eyes turned to the figure standing on the arena. The chaos had ended, but Sargeras's face carried no relief. He looked again at Barty's ear in his hand, and a cold, killing intent slowly settled into his gaze. Chapter 369, The Done. In the end, Sargeras had been careless. He could have chosen a more cautious method or a safer time to probe, but he had not. Barty's blunt confession had lulled him into a false sense of security. When he asked for the Marauder's map, it was almost an explicit declaration. He was already suspicious and preparing to investigate. Yet Barty did not refuse or stall. He agreed readily, his manner so open it brooked no suspicion. It was that flawless composure that led Sargeras straight into a trap. He mistook the other man's readiness for a clear conscience. His taut nerves relaxed, and his probing became a perfunctory hit-or-miss attempt. Convinced the probe would likely fail, he hadn't even chosen a location where he could control the situation. Constant vigilance, Alastair Moody had always said. But facing the fake Moody, Sargeras had stumbled exactly on that basic principle. Fate at that moment was cruelly ironic. Since the start of term, every detail of the fake Moody had been perfect. His extreme remarks, his paranoid mannerisms, his undisguised hatred of Death Eaters, even his voice and gait. The disguise had been watertight enough that even Dumbledore had not seen through it. But ultimately, the mess had come about because Sargeras himself had not been thorough. It was not just anger at Barty for deceiving him and taking Harry. He was angrier at his own carelessness, and that self-directed anger was often harder to bear than hatred of an enemy. "Professor McGonagall, Mad Eye! He's really gone mad!" Ron shrieked, his face white as he saw Professor McGonagall. "Alastair?" Dumbledore stepped forward, his eyes sharp behind half-moon spectacles. "Calm down, Mr. Weasley. Tell me exactly what happened." The headmaster's expression was grave, like a dangerous field emanating from him. In that moment, everyone around him understood anew why Dumbledore was hailed as the greatest wizard of the age, and why Voldemort feared him. "It's Moody," Ron choked out. "He suddenly attacked the students, used an exploding charm, and he used the killing curse." Professor McGonagall gasped, fingers to her lips. Snape's face had gone ashen, his thin lips were pressed tight, and he said nothing. "He took Harry, right before our eyes." Hermione stumbled forward, her face streaked with ash, curls sticking to her forehead. She pleaded, voice breaking, "Please, Professor Dumbledore, we have to go and save Harry at once." At that instant, Karkaroff hurried over, dragging Krum with him, his goatee trembling with outrage. "Dumbledore, you must explain this. Such a thing during the tournament." Krum nearly. "Quiet, Igor." Madame Maxime's authoritative voice cut across him. "Now is not the time for recriminations." She turned to Hermione, her tone gentling. "Child, you say Alastair Moody took Harry Potter?" Hermione nodded. "What does he want to do?" Thunderbird, the black principal of Ouagadougou, frowned when he heard that. Fleur Delacour stepped out from behind Madame Maxime, her beautiful face stricken with fear. The dragon he released nearly hurt Gabrielle. More students gathered, and nervous whispers rippled through the crowd. That magical eye. It was terrifying. A girl from Castellabruxo shuddered. It kept spinning, like it was searching for prey. Professors and principals hurried to comfort frightened students and to piece together what had happened from their fragmentary accounts. Groups of students from other schools gathered, wands clutched tightly, watching the clearing anxiously. Everyone pressed toward Sargeras and found him standing with his palm open, frowning as he looked at a blood-stained ear in his hand. "Sargeras, what is going on?" Professor McGonagall asked first, voice trembling. "Alastor, why? Why would he?" She could hardly believe it. Alastair Moody, the battle-hardened former Auror, was the one behind the chaos. She shook her head in disbelief. If not for the students' consistent testimonies, she would not have believed such an absurdity. "We've been deceived," she said. Sargeras looked up at the pale-faced professors and spoke evenly. "Barty Crouch Sr. has long been under Lord Voldemort's Imperius and has now suffered misfortune. And the Moody, who's been teaching at Hogwarts," he turned the severed ear over in his hand, "is almost certainly Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise." "Barty Crouch Jr.?" Karkaroff frowned. "Wasn't he dead? In Azkaban?" "From what we've seen tonight," Sargeras said, "his death has another story behind it." Snape's pupils narrowed as he thought of the potion ingredients recently stolen from his storeroom. "Polyjuice," he ventured. "Very likely," Sargeras said. "How did I know he was a fake? Earlier, I deliberately mispronounced the name of Barclay, the master alchemist Moody recommended to me years ago, as Furlongkin. The reaction told me everything. He revealed himself, and I revealed myself." He glanced at the cuff of his robe. "He must have seen, through that enchanted eye, that I drew my wand from my sleeve. He made his decision in an instant and struck." "Is Barty Crouch Jr. really that dangerous?" Thunderbird asked, frowning. "Even with your skill, how did he manage?" Sargeras shook his head. "I was careless. He is very clever. He first used the students to tie up our movements, then sabotaged the protective nodes of the dueling arena, releasing magical creatures to sow chaos, and finally took Potter away in the confusion." "Merlin!" Professor Flitwick cried, burying his face in his hands. "He discussed the protective enchantments of the floating arena with me today. I told him where the node locations were." The little charms master's eyes were wide with regret. "This isn't your fault, Professor Flitwick," Sargeras said calmly. "All of us were deceived by him." A cold light flashed behind Dumbledore's half-moon spectacles. So from the very beginning, the one who put Harry's name into the Goblet of Fire was... "It must have been Barty Crouch Jr., Sargeras confirmed. Professor Flitwick couldn't help but shriek. "Merlin, we actually let a Death Eater remain in the castle for nearly a term. Has the real Alastor already?" Dumbledore's face showed neither fury nor despair, but his voice was grave. "I should have noticed sooner. Alastor drank often, but he almost never smelled of alcohol." "Now is not the time for reproach," Sargeras said. "Whoever is posing as Moody must be taking Polyjuice potion continuously. The real Moody is very likely still alive, perhaps imprisoned somewhere in the castle." He slipped the severed ear into his pocket as he spoke. "Search his office first," he added. "If you're lucky, you'll find the Marauder's map there, though he might be carrying it." He swept his gaze over the students gathered there, some bruised and swollen, others singed and with curled hair. At his look, they all bowed their heads. He didn't seem to mind. None of them were dead or grievously hurt, which was a relief he didn't bother concealing. Saving lives was always more complicated than ending them. The light that marked apparition gathered faster around him, Locatus circling overhead like a bright sign. "Wait!" Professor McGonagall cried. "You're not going to pursue him alone?" The apparition light quickened. "Every second we lose reduces Harry's chances," Sargeras said. "He may not have much time." "Do you need?" Thunderbird began, but Sargeras shook his head. "No." Then he turned back to Dumbledore. "If you find the Marauder's map, begin a thorough search of the castle at once. There may be other hidden enemies." He hesitated a moment, as if remembering one more detail. "The feathered snake has vanished without a trace. I don't know whether it slithered into someone's pocket or shoe." Before he finished, his figure had dissolved into the air. From the Forbidden Forest came Locatus's sharp cry, as if guiding its master. Dumbledore opened his mouth, but the man was gone, leaving only a faint smell of residual magic. Dumbledore turned, issuing orders with the steady authority that always steadied others. "Minerva, notify every teacher and have students assemble in the Great Hall. Severus, you and your people seal every exit to the castle. I will search the Defense Against the Dark Arts office myself." He looked at the visitors standing behind him. "Gentlemen, Hogwarts needs your help. Aram, Alfonso, Igor, you will assist Professor Snape in sealing the exits. Harriet, Madame Maxime, help keep the students calm." Heads nodded at once. Karkaroff's face betrayed his reluctance, but under so many eyes he finally gave a begrudging assent. The cold tore like knives, but the sting of apparition's space warping was worse. When the squeezing finally released, Harry lay on his back in an overgrown graveyard. Moonlight carved the crooked tombstones into pale shapes, and in the distance the church spire loomed. A faded sign at a crossroads read, "Little Hangleton Church Graveyard." Barty Crouch Jr. had dropped his disguise. He shoved Harry roughly down against the base of a weathered angel statue and panted. The magical eye had vanished during the last apparition, and his one remaining eye was bloodshot as it darted around. A jagged wound on his left temple, grazed by a spell from Sargeras, still oozed. Blood ran down his jaw and soaked his collar. "Cleaning charm," he snapped. He waved his wand. The blood and dirt vanished from his clothes, though the wound remained horrid. Quickly, with the practiced ease of someone used to quick, dirty work, he set a ring of confundus and trace-concealing charms around them. Harry struggled, but the bindings held fast. His mouth was gagged, and all he could manage were muffled sounds. He watched Barty's every movement, heart slamming against his ribs, a cold dread crawling down his spine. At the same time, he tried to think clearly. Don't panic. You still have the portkey ring Professor Greengrass gave you. A little magic, and you could be gone. But he needed information. Who else was involved? Where their hideout was? If he escaped now, he might lose his chance to bring back more. No time to waste, Potter. Barty's voice was tight, full of fanatic hunger. He grabbed Harry by the collar. "The master is waiting for us. We must do it again." The world squeezed around Harry and spun. He was propelled into a narrow, rubbery tube, every muscle wrenched by the shift. When their feet hit the ground again, they were somewhere far worse. They stood before a dilapidated wooden house that sagged beneath clinging vines and moss. Broken windows were hollow sockets. The whole structure leaned, threatening to collapse. Damp rot and something acrid and chemical filled the air, potions, old and foul. Barty dragged Harry to the door, and instead of forcing it, he tapped a specific rhythm on the wood. After a minute of tense silence, the door cracked open. Peter Pettigrew peered out, greasy, cowardly, the same wet, flickering eyes Harry remembered. "Barty, you're finally here!" Wormtail's voice quavered as he stepped aside. "Come in quickly. The master was just about to be told." Harry's chest tightened. For a moment he'd thought Wormtail was dead. Barty shoved him into the cramped room. Inside was nearly empty. A single cluster of eerie green flames in the hearth gave off a weak light, and on a tattered blanket nearby a giant python lay coiled. Its scales were mottled and rotted in places, bone peeking through, and its vertical pupils tracked Wormtail and Barty before settling on their prisoner. A cold, high voice emanated from the snake's belly, urgent, expectant, absolute in its authority. "Did you bring it, Barty? Did you bring my prize?" 371, Chapter Start Preparation. The giant snake slithered forward with deliberate, horrible slowness, its rotting body dragging across the rough earth and making a spine-chilling rustle. As it closed the distance, the putrid stench of festering wounds assaulted Harry, making him gag. "Ah, we meet again. Harry Potter." The voice was thin and mocking. "It seems you, like me, cannot escape the entanglement of fate." The snake craned its decaying head toward him. The fetid smell intensified. "How ironic," it continued, the much-lauded savior ultimately falling into the Dark Lord's grasp. Harry's pupils pinched to slits and his breath hitched. Barty's earlier words had hinted at this, but seeing it with his own eyes plunged him into an icy pit. This dying, monstrous serpent was Lord Voldemort. A flash of memory struck him. In his first year, Voldemort had peered into others' thoughts in the Chamber of Secrets. Panic tightened Harry's chest. He was in terrible danger. But it was already too late. "The ring!" the high, sharp voice shrieked. A dull gray light flared. Barty's severing charm struck true. Harry felt an explosive, searing pain as his finger was cleanly severed. He watched, helpless, as the portkey ring, his last chance, went with it. Blood shot out, bright and thick, and the life-saving ring rolled across the filth of the floor, clinking and coming to rest a few feet away. "Did you think I would make the same mistake twice?" Voldemort's voice dripped with cruel triumph. "Now, before we stop the bleeding, let us discuss some important matters." Blood streamed from the wound and darkened the dust. Harry gritted his teeth and refused to cry out, knowing that any noise would make things worse. He understood now that not only had he lost a finger, he had lost his last escape. Wormtail timidly closed the creaking wooden door behind them, and the faint green light of the fire inside flickered. The snake's narrow pupils slid over the bound boy with a glint of almost avaricious hunger, but when they landed on Barty Crouch Jr., dirty and wounded, that hunger shifted into a faint displeasure. "My loyal servant," Voldemort's cold, high voice echoed in the cramped space, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once and strike directly at the mind. "You arrived earlier than we scheduled. Hastily, not composed." Voldemort's original plan had been different. Harry would have won the trophy in full view of the crowd. Then the portkey would take him away while he was celebrated, an ostentatious announcement of the Dark Lord's return. That plan had been ruined. Barty bowed low, body trembling from pain, but his tone was rapturous and reverent. "My lord, forgive me for disturbing your perfect design. The situation was critical. I had to act." He hurriedly explained. "We were exposed. That Greengrass, he was testing me, so I had to begin early and bring Potter out." At the name Greengrass, the snake's eyes narrowed, and the already oppressive air seemed to thicken. "Sagres Greengrass," Voldemort repeated flatly. He also went to see Barty Crouch Sr. A cold decisiveness entered his voice. "I could not risk that old man divulging secrets to Sagres, so I allowed him to depart quietly." Barty's body trembled, not in grief but in awe. He lowered his head. "Your decisiveness has once again saved us from danger, my great lord." The hint of displeasure melted somewhat beneath the prize standing before him. Voldemort's gaze returned to the pale boy, and now in his high voice there was a chilling note of appreciation. "You did well, Barty." Though he spoke to Barty, Voldemort's snake-like film-gray eyes never left Harry. "In a crisis, you showed remarkable decisiveness and courage. You foiled the plots of Dumbledore and that Greengrass and brought the person I needed most before me." His voice climbed with fanatical excitement. "What if the plan was hastened? What if the ritual was simplified? The result is what matters. You, Barty Crouch Jr., are my most capable and loyal servant, far superior to those cowards who grovel in the dirt." Wormtail, kneeling nearby, shrank back in fear at the praise, but a flicker of jealousy crossed his face. Barty, however, trembled with rapture. His wounds seemed to fade beneath the honor. "For you, my lord," he choked, "I am willing to give everything." "Very good," Voldemort purred, gaze fixed on Harry, malice coiling like a living thing around the boy. "Then, let us begin preparations." He gave a hoarse laugh that turned instantly cold. "Wormtail, are the cauldron and ingredients ready?" "Yes, my lord," Peter Pettigrew stammered. "Let us depart, to my father's grave." Wormtail's hands shook as he hurried to pack the grim assortment of items. Barty roughly hauled the weakened, bleeding Harry to his feet and dragged him by his robes, flinging open the door and stepping out. The giant snake followed close behind. Wormtail struggled under the weight of a huge cauldron, inside which lay knives and wizarding robes and miscellaneous implements needed for the ritual. He stumbled after them. They passed into a dark birch wood, bare branches like skeletal hands against the night. The ground grew muddy, and the withered weeds scraped Harry's trousers as they went. He forced himself to pay attention to every detail, the crooked shapes of trees, the outlines of stones, anything that might help him later. Finally, they halted before a tall tombstone. The name carved there was unmistakable: Tom Riddle. Barty flung Harry onto the cold, damp grass. The boy gasped and looked up. He knew exactly where he was. The church spire they had seen when they first apparated still stood in the distance, the landmark that had told him where they had been taken. "Wormtail, prepare the cauldron." Barty's voice cracked like a whip through the graveyard silence. He kept a firm grip on Harry while scanning the shadows with the fervor of a fanatic, missing nothing. The wand pressed hard against Harry's temple. Its sting told him any sudden move would be fatal. Wormtail jumped at the command and fumbled to set the heavy stone cauldron in front of Riddle's grave like an altar. He drew from a filthy cloth bag an assortment of grotesque containers, twisted horns, cloudy crystal vials, moss-covered wooden boxes, then tremulously poured viscous and clear liquids into the pot. He raised his wand to light the fire beneath the cauldron, but his magic was nearly spent. His attempts produced only weak, sputtering sparks. "Useless," Barty spat through his teeth, disdain clear in his voice. He did not lower the wand pressed to Harry's head. Instead, with a casual twist of his free hand, a fierce, scorching flame whooshed up from the base of the cauldron and took hold, burning bright and steady. Chapter 372, Resurrection Ceremony. Throughout the entire ritual, the enormous serpent lay coiled nearby, its flat head held high, forked tongue flickering, yellow eyes fixed on the cauldron. Harry's chest felt as if it were on fire. Despair and fear braided through his thoughts. He watched the evil ritual proceed step by step, his mind shrieking for some impossible reversal. When the liquid in the cauldron began to boil and the first bubbles appeared, the giant snake could no longer contain itself. It slithered restlessly, lashed the ground with its tail, and that sharp, cold voice sounded again, "Hurry!" The icy urging made Wormtail tremble. He could barely hold the container. The potion now boiled furiously, gurgling and bubbling, and whenever a bubble burst, sparks like molten metal sprayed out. "It's ready, Master," Wormtail reported, voice shaking. "Very good." The cold voice resonated from the snake's belly. "Nagini, it's your turn." Harry's heart seized. Nagini? Was there someone else here? He looked around, panic rising, but the graveyard held only cold tombstones. Then the answer came. The giant snake glided to the edge of the cauldron, raised its head and suspended it above the roiling liquid. Its neck muscles spasmed violently, and then it opened its huge mouth. With a nauseating, slimy sound, a dark rump of flesh, wrapped in mucus, was spat into the cauldron. For a fleeting moment, lit by the firelight flickering from the pot, Harry saw what that lump truly was. It was a festering, twisted body, more wretched than even the snake, skin wrinkled like a decrepit infant. Is this Lord Voldemort? A surge of disgust and absurd hope rose in Harry. Would they boil him to death? Voldemort's high, icy voice cut through the boiling noise, fanatic and cold. "Bone of the father, unknowingly given, you will renew your son." Barty Crouch Jr. stepped forward instantly. With a nearly sacred solemnity, he strode to the back of Riddle's tombstone, raised his wand, aimed at the earth beneath it, and intoned clearly, "Bone fetch!" The earth split open in answer. A small, grayish-white bone shot out and arced precisely into the churning cauldron. The potion went murky, hissing as if in pain. The sparks turned an ominous phosphorescent green. "Flesh of the servant, willingly given, you will revive your master. Master, please." Wormtail let out a suppressed sob, his face a mask of terror and pleading. But he knew there was no turning back. Shivering as though pulled by invisible strings, he extended his right hand, only 4 fingers remaining. Barty Crouch Jr. showed no mercy. He waved his wand coldly and decisively. A clean flash severed Wormtail's wrist. "No." Wormtail's scream tore through the night as he curled on the ground, blood gushing from the stump. The severed hand thudded into the cauldron. Instantly the potion turned a thick, deep red like fresh blood, bubbling like a blood pool, its evil energy making the air itself tremble. "Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe." Voldemort's voice rose to a frenzied climax, each syllable heavy with 13 years of resentment and the ecstasy of imminent return. Barty Crouch Jr.'s face split into an almost insane smile, eyes bright with fanatic devotion. He roughly seized Harry's still bleeding hand, iron fingers clamping around his wrist. Despite Harry's desperate struggles, he forced the severed finger toward the cauldron, pressing so drops of warm blood fell into the churning, crimson liquid. The moment Harry's blood touched the potion, it seemed to surge with one last, violent life. The huge cauldron fell deathly silent. Then, like a volcanic eruption, an indescribable burst of light exploded from its depths. It was not warm light, but a cold, dazzling pallor, as if frozen flames had been liberated. The glare swallowed the graveyard. Every tombstone and blade of withered grass was etched in stark silhouette. The dark sky seemed rent. Harry's eyes burned with the intensity. He squeezed them shut. Even Barty Crouch Jr. turned his head slightly, though the fanaticism on his face did not fade. Wormtail, curled on the earth, whimpered and buried his face in the dirt. The intense light lasted only a moment, then receded like a tide. The cauldron itself now glowed pale, and something within it was taking shape. Forcing open his stinging eyes despite the fear pounding in his chest, Harry looked toward the pot. In the center of the still churning pearly white surface, a tall, slender human figure slowly rose. The potion slid off him as if alive, leaving no wet trace. He was a man, back to Harry, very tall, skin as pale as bone. Naked in the scalding liquid, he seemed entirely unconcerned. He raised his hand slowly, studying long, strong fingers with a look that mixed greed and wonder. Then he turned. Harry's heart lurched to a stop. The face was as flat as a serpent's, without a nose, only 2 slits for nostrils. His pupils were vertical scarlet slashes, gleaming with cold malice. He stepped out of the cauldron, his feet touching the earth with a soft sound. Those scarlet eyes swept the gathering and fixed finally on the boy in the black robes beside the tombstone, Harry Potter. "Clothe me," the voice commanded, cold and sharp, more distinct than when it had come from the snake. Wormtail, dizzy from blood loss and racked with pain from his severed wrist, scrambled for the robe with his remaining hand, desperate to reclaim any favor. "But not you," Voldemort said, calm, shaking his head. "Your blood would stain it." Wormtail froze, his face draining of color, all subservience and despair. Barty Crouch Jr. hurried forward, reverent and breathless. He picked up the robe as if it were a relic and draped it over his reborn master. Voldemort extended his arms gracefully, allowing Barty to fasten the garment. Now, finally complete in his new body, Lord Voldemort stood again in the world. He lifted his head slightly, savoring the surge of power in him. Ignoring Wormtail cowering beneath his feet, his scarlet eyes turned slowly back to the pale-faced boy. After a long, charged pause, that cold, high voice echoed through the silent graveyard once more. "Lord Voldemort has returned." Chapter 373, Torture. Lord Voldemort's voice rolled over the graveyard like a physical weight, stealing the breath from Harry's lungs. "Lord Voldemort has returned." The words themselves seemed to be a dark kind of magic, seeping into the earth and stirring something older and colder. He walked toward Harry with slow, sinuous grace, like a venomous snake rearing up. His red eyes fixed on Harry without blinking, full of complicated, unreadable feelings, pure hatred, a morbid curiosity, and something almost like twisted gratitude. "Harry Potter," he spoke softly, a hiss that felt unbearably intimate. "Look at us, face to face again. Fate is a strange thing, isn't it?" He stopped a few paces away and studied Harry from above. Harry clenched his teeth and forced himself to stand tall. The scar burned as if a hot blade were being twisted in his skull. Fear ran through his limbs like ice. Still, he held himself as straight as he could. 13 years. Voldemort spread his arms slowly, his black robes unfurling like bat wings, as if he were embracing the darkness. 13 years. I wandered in the shadows, less than the lowliest ghost, forced to cling to other bodies to survive. And it all began that night in Godric's Hollow, with an infant. Anger surged up through Harry and overrode the fear. He saw his parents' smiling faces, remembered them as they had appeared in the mirror of Erised. "You killed them," he spat, voice shaking with rage. "You killed them." Voldemort's lips curled in a short, cold sneer. "Yes, I killed them. Cleansing the wizarding world of mudbloods and traitors is a necessary purification." His gaze slid back to Harry's face, his slit nostrils twitching. "But I am fair. Though I killed your parents, I also finished off my pathetic muggle father myself." He turned and pointed to a nearby gravestone, a nearly gleeful smile on his face. "Look, this is his grave. Unlike your mother, my coward of a father refused to accept his magical wife and son. He abandoned us when my mother needed him most." "Oh, really?" Harry said icily, a mocking expression on his face. "Then you're lucky. If I had been your father, I wouldn't have let you live. I'd have ended you the moment you were born." Voldemort turned slowly. Instead of anger, he laughed, a cold, sinister sound. Still chuckling, he replied casually, "Yes, what a pity. You are not." He moved to Nagini's side and ran a pale hand over the giant snake's matted head with an almost tender motion. "I feel a bit sentimental." His tone stayed detached, as if reciting a history lesson. "Originally, the ancient magic your mother left on you protected you and rebounded my killing curse." His voice climbed and echoed among the stones. "But look now, I have reshaped my body with your blood. What does that mean?" He leaned in until his red eyes were almost level with Harry's. "It means your mother's magic flows in my veins now as well. The magic that once saved you cannot stop me. We are bound, Potter. You and I." Cold settled into Harry's bones, an all-consuming chill. When fear reaches its limit, it can sometimes turn into a desperate bravery. Hearing Voldemort boast of their blood link, Harry stopped trying to keep his body from shaking. He lifted his chin and stared back at the dark, twisted face without flinching. He forced a sneer. "Bound?" His voice was low, but it reached Voldemort. "Yes, with my blood. Sounds impressive. But have you forgotten something, Lord Voldemort? Harry drew a steady breath and met those snake-like eyes. In a way, aren't I also your father? Shouldn't you call me father? How dare you? Barty Crouch Jr. shrieked, brandishing his wand. Voldemort narrowed his red eyes a fraction and silenced him with a barely perceptible gesture. You are brave, Potter, Voldemort sneered. Do you prefer me to kill you quickly because you fear torture? Harry only smiled, unafraid. Go ahead. It's not the first time you've killed your own father, anyway. Voldemort's face was flat, unreadable, but the twitching of his nostrils quickened. After a beat, a cruel smile spread over his lips. Crucio! Ah! Harry collapsed to the ground, his body arching like something snapped. A scream ripped out of him involuntarily, as pain seared through every part of him, as if an invisible drill bored from his chest into his bones. Each nerve felt like it was on fire. He hadn't wanted to cry out, but he couldn't hold it in. He longed for a quick end, but he knew Voldemort wanted to watch him beg, and he refused to give him that satisfaction. Whether it lasted a second or an eternity, the agony finally ebbed. He opened his eyes to see Voldemort loomed above him, wand in hand, watching with mocking amusement. Harry shut his eyes again against the sight. Ha! Look at your face. You don't even have a nose. Were you always this ugly? I would never want a son like you, but sadly I can't drown you. Wormtail was so terrified he stopped even sniffling. No one dared to insult the Dark Lord so brazenly. For a few seconds there was a deathly hush, then Voldemort laughed, low and terrible. Very well, Potter. His voice was a freezing whisper, every word like a shard of ice. You are very like your father. You face death without fear, so be it. He raised his wand slowly, the U-tip steady, aimed straight at Harry's chest. All amusement drained from his scarlet eyes, leaving only cold, murderous intent. I have changed my mind, Lord Voldemort said, his voice eerily calm. It seems I must do some cleaning before I summon my servants. A green light, death's color, gathered at the tip of his wand, bright and blinding, like the opening eye of hell. Harry felt his heart stall, but he kept his eyes open. With the last of his strength, he held a mocking smile on his face, aware he had provoked Voldemort and that this might be his final act, to defend the dignity of his parents and of all who had resisted, refusing to bow. Avada Kedavra! The green bolt tore through the dark and vanished into nothing. Humph! A sneer escaped Voldemort. His voice returned to that cold calm, but the malice in it had deepened. You wanted to provoke me, to make it quick and clean, to die a heroic martyr like your foolish parents? He shook his head slowly, as if disappointed in a flawed masterpiece. No, that would be too easy for you. Voldemort lowered his wand completely, a mocking smile on his lips. Death for you should be a spectacle. It should be public, in front of all the fools who worship you. It should be neither unseen nor hasty. He stopped looking at Harry and turned his attention to the ground. Master, my hand, you promised me. Master. A weak, tear-choked voice crawled across the dirt. Peter Pettigrew lay prostrate, blood trickling from a severed wrist and staining the earth. His face was streaked with tears and snot. He whimpered like a mangy dog begging for scraps. Voldemort finally strolled over to Wormtail and, looking down, drawled, "Hold out your arm." A flash of rapture lit Wormtail's eyes. He thrust his bloody stump up, voice shrill with gratitude. "Oh, Master! Thank you, Master! You are merciful!" Voldemort cut him off with a short, cold snort. "Not that one, Wormtail." Hope evaporated at once. Wormtail's body convulsed, his remaining hand clawed at the dirt. "Oh, Master, please, please." Barty Crouch Jr. stepped forward. Ignoring Wormtail's sobs, he grabbed the man's intact left hand and forced it before Voldemort. Voldemort glanced at the dark mark on Pettigrew's arm, then extended a pale finger and touched it lightly. "Now let us see." His voice dropped, sinister. Harry's scar throbbed again. Wormtail burst into a high wail. "Ah!" Wormtail curled in on himself, but Barty held him down, preventing any escape. After a moment, Voldemort withdrew his finger. Harry, dizzy and struggling to remain upright, saw that the faded mark had been inked black as night. Voldemort's face resumed that triumphant, omnipotent expression. He straightened, lifted his chin, and surveyed the graveyard, dead, dark, spread out before him, like a king. "Guess how many will be clever enough to answer the summons?" he asked, voice low and cold. "And how many will be too foolish to come?" He let his arm fall and waited. The graveyard fell into an oppressive silence. Barty's face shone with anticipatory pride, like a soldier awaiting inspection. Wormtail had stilled into terrified submission. 1 minute, 2 minutes, only the wind whispered through the stones. Then, without warning, faint snapping sounds began to teeter through the air, like many ropes being struck at once. Pop, crack, 1, 2, 5, 10. Hooded, masked figures appeared among the graves. The noises of apparition rose and fell like a chorus of specters summoned from the depths. They advanced silently, black robes billowing in the night wind like a shadowed forest, and gathered around Voldemort in a tight ring. No one spoke, only nervous breaths and the rustle of cloth. Through the eye holes of their masks, every gaze focused on the familiar, hated figure who had once been their master and whom they had thought dead. Voldemort looked over them with an expression like a butcher counting lambs. Then his voice cut through the silence, clear as ice needles. "Welcome, Death Eaters. 13 long years have passed, and we are gathered once more." His tone turned even colder. "Tonight, we begin again. We will correct the mistakes of the past." Barty seized the moment, raised his wand, and sent a single command into the sky. Mors Mordre. A living green skull and serpent burst upward, suspended above the graveyard like a terrible banner. The dark mark cast its glow across the masked faces and across Harry's pallid features. Voldemort's voice carried a hint of sarcasm. "I expected a warmer welcome." A ripple of timid trembling ran through the circle. One of the Death Eaters collapsed to his knees and flung himself prostrate, smearing himself at Voldemort's feet as if he were mud. He kissed the hem of the dark robes, begging, "Master, Master, please forgive us. We waited. We've longed for your return every moment." Voldemort did not spare him a glance. His scarlet eyes swept slowly over the others, as though searching for prey. "Oh, really?" he added softly. "All I see is prosperity, comfort. I see you running to avoid punishment, obsessed with wealth." His voice turned like a winter wind. "I do not see one soul who came to find their dying master." Where his invisible gaze touched, the circle trembled as one. He raised his snake-like face and inhaled, nostrils flaring. "I smell guilt." He spat the words with disgust. "The air is thick with the stench of guilt." Barty Crouch Jr., standing at his side, gave a timely, scornful sneer, his eyes sweeping contemptuously over his masked colleagues. The Death Eaters shrank back, as if the look itself could burn them. Everyone seemed to want to flee, but fear pinned their feet in place. Lord Voldemort turned his gaze back to the crowd. His voice went distant, as though dredged up from some old wound. "I asked myself, again and again, through countless agonizing nights." He paused so the question could hang in the air, heavy on every Death Eater's heart. "Why did my loyal servants not come to help the master to whom they swore eternal allegiance?" No one answered. Only Wormtail lay on the ground, cradling his bleeding arm and sobbing. Voldemort's voice dropped to a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the assembled circle. "I told myself they must have thought Lord Voldemort was finished, thought I was completely done for. So they hurried back among my enemies, groveling, claiming their innocence, blaming an imperious curse." He shook his head. "Then I asked myself, why didn't they believe I would rise again? Did they not know I had long ago mastered the power to defy death? Had they not seen, with their own eyes, that I was more powerful than any wizard, proven time and again? I told myself," he continued, "perhaps they believed some greater power could defeat the omnipotent Lord Voldemort." Unease rippled through the ranks. Some Death Eaters collapsed to their knees, unable to bear the mental strain, murmuring incoherent pleas for mercy. Voldemort paid them no mind. 13 years, he said slowly, and many of you forgot fear, forgot loyalty, forgot who you were. This disappoints me." He let the words sit, then added with a thin, mocking smile, "I admit I am disappointed. Master, I have not disappointed you." Wormtail jerked his tear-streaked face up, groaning, seizing the single chance before him. "I have always been searching for you. Master, please, for the sake of my loyalty." Voldemort lowered his head and looked at him with nothing but cold mockery. "Wormtail," he said, "you returned to me not out of loyalty, but because you were afraid of your dear old friends, afraid of Black and Lupin, weren't you?" "No, Master, I am loyal. Of course I am loyal." Wormtail babbled, trying to defend himself. "It was because of my loyalty that I returned to your side." "Lies." Voldemort watched the man weep on the ground. But even a despicable traitor who helped me regain my body will be kept. Lord Voldemort does not mistreat those who have aided him, no matter how base the motive." He raised his yew wand and waved it in an elegant arc. A hand-shaped glow, mercury bright, outlined itself in the air, knuckles distinct, palm lines simulated. It floated down and settled exactly on Wormtail's still bleeding wrist. The sobbing stopped. Wormtail jerked his head up, staring at the new limb in disbelief. The silver hand joined his severed stump as if it had always belonged there, smooth, cold, metal, exquisitely fashioned. He trembled as he flexed the fingers, clumsy at first, then gradually smoother. He fumbled for a dry twig and the silver fingers closed. The twig crumbled into dust, sifted through his hand. Wild joy broke across Wormtail's face. "My master," he choked, voice choked with gratitude. "Master, it's perfect, so powerful. Thank you for your gift." He crawled forward and kissed the hem of Voldemort's robe. Voldemort allowed a half-smile. "Let this hand remind you," he said, "not to let your loyalty waver so easily, Wormtail." "Of course, my master. Never, I swear." Wormtail blurted then, as if daring to hope, added, If master would be merciful and help me regain the magic that was drained from me." Voldemort laughed softly, as though he had just remembered something, and raised his wand again. An uncontrollable smile spread across Wormtail's face. "Avada Kedavra!" A green light flashed. Wormtail fell limp to the ground. The assembled Death Eaters shuddered as if the curse had passed through them as well. Voldemort sheathed his wand with no expression but a flash of disgust. Ignoring the corpse, he swept his crimson gaze over the black-robed circle, letting it search the gaps where people should have been. His face grew darker with every empty space it found. He stepped forward as if drawn to one of them. "Lestrange and her husband should be standing here," he said coldly. "They chose Azkaban over betraying me." He moved on to another vacancy, his voice colder. "Avery should have been here. McNair should be here. Selwyn should be here." He named the absentees one by one. With each name, his pale face tightened, the air around him seeming to thicken, the anger congealing into something almost visible. "So many of my Death Eaters didn't come," he said, and the tone of his voice hardened. "Even Crabbe and Goyle, those two who should have run like hounds, are not here." His gaze fell like a cold chain on a man in the front row, a Death Eater wearing an ornate silver mask. The man stood ramrod straight and, even under Voldemort's stare, showed none of the trembling that racked the others. "Lucius, my clever friend," Voldemort said softly, each word deliberate. "Can you tell me why so many of my once trusted companions chose to be absent from this gathering tonight?" All eyes fixed on the masked figure. The man did not prostrate himself, did not beg. Instead, he did something that made the entire assembly, Voldemort included, pause. He raised his hand, unbuckled the strap that held the mask, and slowly removed the silver covering. Beneath it was a composed face. His gaze met Voldemort's, calm yet steady, and his voice carried clearly through the graveyard silence. "Because they couldn't come," he said. "Because some I killed, some I drained of their magic, and as for the rest, they saw the error of their ways and left your ridiculous Death Eater ranks." Harry's heart nearly leapt out of his throat when he saw the face behind the silver mask. Professor Greengrass. How could he be here? A flood of questions washed over Harry, making him momentarily forget his immediate danger. Around him, the Death Eaters who had answered the summons of the Dark Mark gave suppressed gasps. None of them had expected such a brazen impostor in their midst. The faces under the hoods exchanged glances and then all raised their wands, taking up attacking stances. Barty Crouch Jr.'s expression shifted. He began to move forward to seize the uninvited guest, but Lord Voldemort lifted a hand to stop him. No emotion registered on the snake-like face, but his scarlet eyes narrowed as he appraised Sargeras from head to toe. Silence fell over the crowd. "We meet again, Sargeras," Voldemort said, his voice cold and controlled. "Your audacity is greater than I imagined, to infiltrate our gathering and stand here so openly before me." There was an icy, murderous edge to his words that made the air feel colder. "I don't know whether to call you arrogant or utterly foolish, perhaps both." Sargeras casually tossed the ornate silver mask to the ground. It hit the stone with a sharp clang. His expression was as calm as Voldemort's, his dark eyes sweeping slowly over the cloaked faces before settling back on the Dark Lord. "Perhaps," he said lightly. "I was simply curious. Curious how many, after so many years, would hear your summons again and wisely choose not to come." He paused, a smile with meaning touching his lips, "and how many would foolishly choose to return." The words struck like a lash, producing a ripple of unease through the Death Eaters. Voldemort watched him in silence for a long moment, then let out a short, cold sneer. "Esteemed Professor Greengrass," he said with hollow politeness that dripped with mockery, "you don't actually think I am as weak and powerless as I was when we last met, do you?" He stepped closer until they were nearly face to face. "If you do, you are gravely mistaken. I have reclaimed my strength." "Is that so?" Sargeras answered without heat, smoothing his sleeve as if rearranging his thoughts. "But I see no difference." Then, as if recalling something with faint amusement, he added, "Of course, there is one change. Your monstrous appearance. This is the first time I've seen it." Voldemort's expression did not shift. He began to pace slowly around Sargeras, the hem of his robes whispering across the grass. "Great achievement demands a price," he said. "It is only natural to sacrifice a little to reach greatness." Sargeras chuckled, "Including the great achievement of tearing your soul to pieces?" A sinister laugh escaped Voldemort, rising in volume. "Mortals must cower in the shells fate has given them, living insignificant lives. But I, Lord Voldemort, can, with unmatched wisdom and power, forge a body for myself." He turned, displaying his new form as if it were a trophy. "Behold, a prerogative of gods." Sargeras studied him for a long, calm moment and then shook his head in regret. "I see only a clumsy, defective product." Voldemort's patience snapped. His pale fingers tightened around his wand. Killing intent flared in his red eyes. "Is this your dying wish, Sargeras?" The air chilled as if frost had crept over the graveyard. The Death Eaters instinctively fell back, creating a ring of space around the two men. "Wait a moment," Sargeras said, raising a hand with the serene tone of someone pausing a lecture. Voldemort froze, a mocking curl forming at the corner of his mouth. "Finally feeling fear, Professor?" he taunted. "A little late to plead for mercy, isn't it?" Sargeras merely shook his head and let his gaze sweep over the hooded figures. It paused on the bound form of Harry. "Before we begin," he called out, his voice carrying to every tombstone, "I will ask but one thing. Aside from Harry Potter, is there anyone here who wishes to leave?" A deadly silence answered him. Voldemort's laugh cut through it, high, cold, echoing among the graves. "Look at them, Sargeras. These faithful servants, having chosen to return, will never leave again. As for Harry Potter," he turned his wand toward Harry's chest, "he certainly will not leave, for he will die first as a warning to any who still hold illusions." He never finished. Harry's figure blurred like a reflection disturbed by a pebble. Before anyone could react, the boy vanished, leaving only a few black feathers that skittered on the wind. The triumphant expression froze on Voldemort's face and was replaced by a fury that showed in the lethal fix of his eyes. "What trickery is this?" he snarled, turning his gaze on Sargeras. Without waiting for an answer, he lashed out with his wand. "Find him! Bring that boy back to me!" The Death Eaters sprang into motion. "I regret to say," Sargeras interrupted, shaking his head gently. From beneath his feet, a line of searing flame shot out like a coiling serpent, racing across the ground. Where the fire touched, the grass blackened and burned, and the line closed into a perfect circle that surrounded Voldemort and his followers. The flames licked at their robes, reflecting off faces that were suddenly bewildered and fearful. "I already gave you all a chance," Sargeras said calmly, but there was ice in his gaze. Pale, spectral flames licked higher, forming a distinct border between life and death. Voldemort stared at the encircling fire and let loose a cold sneer. "Sagres Greengrass, are you so arrogant as to think you alone can hold us all?" Flames danced in Sargeras's eyes as he raised an eyebrow. "You've said two things wrong, Tom," he replied steadily. He ignored Voldemort's sudden darkening scowl and drew his wand with unhurried precision. The tip began to glow a terrible scarlet light. "First," he said, "this is not arrogance. And second," the glow intensified, humming with raw power, "I never intended merely to hold you back. Avada Kedavra." The green light tore across the air the instant Sargeras finished the word, streaking toward where Lord Voldemort had been standing. He was gone before it reached him. One heartbeat later, Sargeras reappeared, 3 yards to the Dark Lord's left, his wand flicking, and a crimson beam lanced out like lightning. Voldemort's reaction was equally instantaneous. He apparated as Sargeras materialized. The crimson bolt skimmed his afterimage and struck a Death Eater who had been too slow to move. There was no scream. His body dissolved in the red light, robes, bones, and all turning into a steaming puddle of blood that splashed across the grass. The metallic tang of iron filled the air, and the battle erupted. Sargeras did not hesitate. He sent another red light toward Voldemort's new position, then stepped aside as a green curse came for him. "Lapifors," he cried. "Reducto," came the reply. Attack spells shot at him from every direction now. The Death Eaters had finally engaged. Sargeras waved his wand, and a giant wolf made of flame burst from a wall of fire, barreling into the crowd. Spells crisscrossed the graveyard. Sargeras blinked out of sight and reappeared elsewhere. "Cruciatus," someone hissed. Voldemort sneered and cast a dazzling red curse. Sargeras had just apparated when the red light slammed into his chest. The pain lanced through him, but before Voldemort could revel in it, he raised his wand and loosed a killing curse. The green bolt skimmed Sargeras's robes and shattered a nearby tombstone. At the same instant, a thin cutting spell slid from Sargeras's wand toward Voldemort's neck. The sneer on Voldemort's face froze and horror flashed in his eyes. He ducked at the last second, and the knife-like spell whispered past his scalp, almost decapitating him. "It's a pity, Tom," Sargeras said calmly. "Crucio doesn't work on me." Without warning, a flood of black, feathered shapes, birds formed of raw magic, streamed from his wand and hurtled toward Voldemort. "Protego!" Voldemort snapped, throwing up a transparent shield. The magical birds struck it and erupted into sparks, their forms flaring wildly before they scattered. Apparition popped all around the graveyard as combatants vanished and reappeared, and the Death Eaters, thrown by the ferocity and speed of the attack, ran, shouted, and hesitated with wands raised. One moment, Voldemort stood on a tombstone, casting Avada Kedavra. The next, Sargeras had been behind him. One moment, Sargeras was firing lightning from a distance. The next, he was inches from Voldemort, wand leveled. "Is that all you've got, Tom?" he asked, voice even as he warded off a purple curse. "If so, you won't escape your doom tonight." "Arrogant fool," Voldemort spat. He unleashed a reducto. "You and Dumbledore's nonsense?" Sargeras shrugged, parrying spells as if swatting at flies. "I am not Dumbledore. He believes love redeems everything. I believe only in an absolute truth. Some darkness must be extinguished." Voldemort laughed, a thin, cold sound. "You would take my life, Sargeras? Do you truly think you can?" He did not finish the taunt. He drove his wand down. Bombarda, a jagged, searing energy ripped through the earth toward Sargeras. Calm as ever, Sargeras thrust his wand at the ground. A thick earthen wall surged up and took the blast. Dust and stone fell in a choking cloud, and in that cloud, Voldemort had already cobbled together another spell. Avada Kedavra. Sargeras did something nobody expected. He stood his ground. With a flick of his wand, he telekinetically yanked a Death Eater who had been skulking for an ambush into his path. The green light hit the space where Sargeras had been and fizzled. The Death Eater's scream choked off in a wet, final sound as the curse washed over him and he collapsed limp. The instant the body hit the sodden grass, a red bolt flashed from behind it toward Voldemort's chest. The Dark Lord spat and apparated. The red spell struck the spot he had just occupied with an earth-shattering boom, throwing debris and steam into the air. Voldemort reappeared, eyes burning with hatred. "You cannot kill me," he snarled. "You could never be my equal." Sargeras smoothed his sleeve as if tidying a crease and spoke with the same placid certainty. "Nothing is impossible, Tom, and you cannot imagine how many will remain in this graveyard tonight." His gaze swept the field. 4 Death Eaters lay dead from the crossfire between the two of them. The rest had lost whatever will they'd had. Hands shaking, wands clutched uselessly, retreat edging their feet. Voldemort followed the look, and his expression twitched with rage. "You will pay for your arrogance," he hissed, beginning to gather a black, oppressive light. The air thickened, the pale flames that ringed the graveyard guttered and shivered. Sargeras would not allow the curse to build. Seed of woe! An invisible shock raced out like a blade. Voldemort's spell died mid-incantation. Something inside him convulsed, a horrible pressure as if something was clawing to get out. A raw animal scream tore from his mouth, and then the impossible happened. His belly ruptured, and a slimy, bloodied thing tore free through flesh and skin, bursting from his waist like a living wound. Shock turned to fury in Voldemort's face, but Sargeras had already unleashed a storm. Crimson Rend, Reducto, Frenzied Explosion, Diffindo, 4 spells launched in a ruthless, synchronized volley. Voldemort managed to beat off the first 3, but the 4th nicked his arm. Diffindo's lashing edge opened the skin, and the momentum of the blow sent his posture faltering. Avada Kedavra. A killing curse slammed into Sargeras from the side. He abandoned his attempt to press the attack on Lord Voldemort, melting into a raven-black shadow and shooting up into the sky, then diving like an arrow in the next instant. Voldemort had ripped the remaining creature free from his body, and seizing the chance, forced every drop of Nagini's blood into the wound at his waist. The gash knit visibly, but his eyes were unmistakably terrified. He could feel death knocking again. Sargeras flickered across the graveyard, each appearance accompanied by a lethal spell. His assaults came like lightning, forcing Voldemort back again and again. The Dark Lord clung to life by apparating away on the edge of every attack. "All you ever do is dodge, Tom." Sargeras' voice came from everywhere at once, each syllable aimed at his enemy's nerves. The figure was elusive, perching on top of tombstones one moment, appearing behind a Death Eater the next, striking from unexpected angles. Voldemort roared and sent a blood-red fiendfire from his wand. The flames twisted into a monstrous fiery serpent that lunged for Sargeras. Sargeras only flicked his wand and said coldly, "A fool who never learns." The enormous red snake thinned as it neared him, collapsing in a blink into a pale fire raven that wheeled back toward Voldemort. In panic, he apparated again, shoving a Death Eater forward as a human shield. The attack followed relentlessly. A streak of red light struck the man, and the sound of splintering bone and blood filled the air, splattering across Voldemort. "Keep running, Tom," Sargeras said. Voldemort's terror was absolute now. He had tasted death before. Nothing terrified him more than its return. He apparated frantically once more, but Sargeras shadowed him like a second skin. "Raise the dead!" The corpses inside the ring of flame answered, springing up and surging at the panicked Dark Lord. The surviving Death Eaters had already fallen into chaos. Apart from Barty Crouch Jr., who still struggled with the fiery giant wolf, they all tried to apparat away. Sargeras briefly broke off his pursuit and pointed upward. 2 apparition lights were abruptly severed in midair and shattered, and dismembered limbs rained down. The reanimated corpses pounced on Voldemort. Wormtail's silver hand shot out and clutched at the hem of his robes. "Get off!" Voldemort bellowed, slashing with his wand. A cutting curse sheared the arm off at the shoulder, but the silver hand still clung to the robe. That momentary delay was all Sargeras needed. He appeared directly in front of Voldemort, his wand moving so fast it was almost a blur. Swish, swish, swish. 3 red beams burst from his wand in a triangular volley. One struck the corpse clutching the robe, another grazed the hem, and the third flew straight for Voldemort. He tried to apparat, but the space around him had been sealed. His wand hand trembled, too weak to defend. Time seemed to stop. Under the horrified eyes of the Death Eaters, the final crimson ray struck him. "No," Voldemort began, but the roar died in his throat. His crimson eyes widened in shocked disbelief as they reflected Sargeras' rigid face. With a wet sound, the proud Dark Lord slumped into a bubbling pool of dark red blood that seeped slowly into the graveyard soil. His wand rolled away and was swallowed in a flash of flame. Silence fell like a blanket. The Death Eaters stared at the pool, stunned. Some stumbled back, others let their wands drop unnoticed. Barty Crouch Jr. fell to his knees, pale and trembling, unable to speak. Sargeras raised his wand again, and the pale flames around the graveyard surged. From them sprang several fire-formed creatures. The Death Eaters, broken in will, scattered under the beast's onslaught, but none escaped. The flames consumed them into ash. Sargeras lowered his wand and walked to the kneeling Barty, who, dazed, still pawed at the dark blood as if searching for his master. "Decide your fate," Sargeras said calmly. "Kill me," Barty rasped, eyes wild with hate. "No," Sargeras shook his head. "You are not your master. For him, death was the worst punishment. For you—" "Kill me," Barty shrieked again, ashen. Sargeras crouched, coming close enough that his voice was little more than a whisper. I will make you the first step of Hogwarts' Great Hall. Day after day, year after year, every student who enters and leaves that castle will tread upon you. Exposed to wind and sun, eaten by rain and snow, you will remain conscious, aware, forever, until the end of your life. For the first time, a flicker of something like fear crossed Barty's lifeless eyes. Sargeras straightened, expressionless. Believe me, I will do as I say. When the giant raven Loctus set Harry down before Hogwarts, the castle hummed with frantic, uneasy energy. The professors hurried the students into the great hall. Every face wore alarm. Merlin's beard? Is that a dragon? Professor Flitwick cried, the first to spot the huge, dark shape against the night. Professor McGonagall raised her wizard's hat and peered up, then recognized the raven's unmistakable outline. No, Phileas, that's Greengrass's raven. It's carrying someone. Snape's black robes billowed as he stepped forward, a hard edge in his dark eyes. Potter, he said. The raven circled once more, then settled with graceful weight. Harry slid from its back, still trembling as his feet hit the stone. Loctus gave a low cry and nudged his shoulder with its dark beak, as if to steady him. Harry! Professor McGonagall rushed forward, face drained white. Thank Merlin, you're alive. Dumbledore hurried over, his blue eyes behind half-moon spectacles sweeping Harry for injuries. They paused at Harry's hand. One finger was severed, and Dumbledore's pupils tightened. Madame Pomfrey, he said softly, motioning the nurse up from below. Attend to Mr. Potter at once. Harry shook his head. Though pale, his voice was steady. Professors, you have to go help Professor Greengrass. Voldemort, he's been resurrected. The words landed like a stone in water. The professors gasped. The gathered students began to whisper and shudder. In a place called Little Hangleton, Harry added hurriedly, in a graveyard next to a church. Voldemort is there, and there are many Death Eaters. Before anyone could answer, Loctus's deep voice sounded in everyone's minds. No need to come. The giant raven stretched its vast wings. Under the stunned eyes of the castle, it rose into the night and vanished into the darkness. After the raven left, Madame Pomfrey hurried forward to examine Harry's injuries. When she saw the severed finger, her brows drew together. This is a cutting wound caused by the dark arts, she said gravely. A very nasty one. I'm sorry, Mr. Potter, but without the specific counter curse, I cannot regrow it. The room fell silent. Ron's mouth hung open. Hermione covered her face, tears welling in her eyes. Harry, however, was unexpectedly calm. He looked down at his right hand, no longer bleeding, but missing the index finger. It's all right, Madame Pomfrey, he said, forcing a smile. If losing a finger is what it takes to finish Lord Voldemort for good, then it's a price I'll pay. Hermione opened her mouth, then closed it. Harry met Dumbledore's eyes and continued, Professor Greengrass must have killed Lord Voldemort, don't you think? His optimism made Professor McGonagall look away. Snape's expression was strained. At Dumbledore's signal, Madame Pomfrey gave Harry a sedative and some restorative potions, then settled him into a bed at the back of the hospital wing. Exhaustion hit him in waves as he lay down, but sleep would not come easily. Ron and Hermione sat at his bedside. Dumbledore pulled up a chair and sat with them. McGonagall and Snape stood at the foot of the bed. All eyes were on Harry. So, Harry, Dumbledore asked gently, if you can and you feel clear-headed enough, could you tell us exactly what happened after you were taken? Harry drew a breath, nodded, and began to tell them everything. He started with being taken by Barty Crouch Jr. to the graveyard in Little Hangleton, described how Voldemort had been grotesquely housed in Nagini, and how Wormtail assisted in the resurrection ritual. Then he used my blood, Harry said, his voice a little dry, to complete the ritual and return to a body. When he told them how Voldemort had summoned the Death Eaters and boasted of his return, Ron went pale and Hermione gripped the bed covers. Just when I thought it was all over, Harry said, eyes brightening, Professor Greengrass appeared. He was disguised as a Death Eater, standing among them. He described how Sargeras confronted Voldemort, how he sent him away by some unknown means, and how Loquetus caught him in the night sky. I never knew Loquetus was so powerful, Harry added. Dumbledore looked surprised. That is no ordinary power, to become so vast. Harry's story drew to a close. The last thing I saw before I was taken away was the professor raising a wall of fire with magic, trapping all the Death Eaters, Voldemort included, inside. His voice trembled. I don't know what happened after that. Mr. Lockhetis took me away from there. Silence settled over the ward, broken only by the soft breathing of those present. So, Dumbledore said slowly, his gaze sharp behind his half-moon spectacles, Sargeras chose to face Voldemort and all his Death Eaters alone? Harry nodded. Everyone was encircled by the wall of fire. No help? Ron breathed. Professor shouldn't be without help. I mean, one person against you-know-who and all the Death Eaters. That's incredible. He can do that, Hermione whispered through her tears. He saved you, Harry. Harry felt the sedative's pull and the drowsiness creeping in. Yes, Hermione, he saved me again. As sleep finally took him, images of pale flames and the figure standing within them drifted through his mind. The hospital wing doors opened abruptly. A dusty, disheveled Sirius Black stood in the doorway, his greatcoat still damp with night dew, hair wild, gray eyes burning with anxiety. Harry! He rushed to the bed and relaxed only when he saw his godson breathing steadily. Madame Pomfrey stepped forward, lowering her voice. Mr. Black, he just fell asleep. He's been through something terrible. I heard, Sirius rasped. He sat beside the bed and wouldn't take his eyes off Harry. Alastor. No, the impostor took him away. Dumbledore has told me the gist. His fingers trembled as he brushed the bandages on Harry's right hand, a flash of pain crossing his face. What happened? What did they do to him? A cutting wound caused by the dark arts, Madame Pomfrey explained softly. It cannot be regrown. Sirius's jaw clenched, but he controlled himself. What about that man? Barty Crouch Jr.? Unclear. Madame Pomfrey sounded shaken. Professor Greengrass hasn't returned yet. Harry stirred and slowly opened his eyes. When he saw Sirius, he was fully awake. Sirius? 'Sright, kid? Sirius tried for a smile and took Harry's uninjured hand. I hear you had quite a night. For the next hour, Harry went over it again, with Sirius holding his hand the whole time. At Voldemort's resurrection, Sirius's grip tightened. At Sargeras's sudden appearance, his brow lifted in surprise. Dawn was filtering through the windows when the hospital wing doors opened once more. Sargeras stood in the doorway, his robes intact, but his face drawn and tired. His gaze went to Harry first. He nodded once, then turned to Dumbledore and the others. It's over. His voice was hoarse. All debts have been paid. Not one remains. Silence fell. Everyone stared at the man who had alone faced Voldemort and his followers. Harry pushed himself up and met Sargeras's eyes. Thank you, Professor. Thank you for saving me. Don't thank me, Potter. Sargeras inclined his head slightly. Your courage impressed me. Get well soon. Chapter 380. Letter early that morning, as students, still half asleep, filed into the Hogwarts entrance hall, several Ravenclaws stopped at once. Isn't there an extra step here? One girl said, tapping the stone with her toe. Indeed, a pale step had appeared at the familiar threshold, fitting perfectly with the others as if it had always been there but never noticed. Its surface was unnaturally smooth, gleaming with a cold polish in the new light. Meanwhile, Sagres slipped into the kitchen alone. The house elves bustled around him, serving breakfast with delighted fervor. He ate his toast slowly until a familiar figure approached timidly. Esteemed sir. Dobby's large eyes were full of awe. Sagres set down his teacup and smiled. Yes, Dobby. Dobby's ears trembled. He bowed so low his long nose almost touched the floor. Sir is a great wizard. Sagres smiled without answering. After a quick, simple breakfast, he made his way to his office. The night's fierce battle had left him unusually exhausted. His fingertips still tingled from the excessive use of magic. He didn't want to cast a single charm. He only wanted to sleep. But when he reached his office door, the drowsiness eased. The heavy oak was scrawled in paint, crooked skulls, screaming figures, a burning castle, and across it, in crimson letters, a single line screamed, You will pay, you tyrant, you devil. Sagres frowned for a moment, then relaxed. The dueling platform's destruction had likely freed Peeves to play pranks again. This looked like the sort of childish vandalism he would leave behind. Cleaning charm, he said softly, tapped his wand, and the stains vanished. As he pushed the door open, a gray-brown owl landed on the windowsill, anxiously tapping the glass with its beak. Sagres opened the window. The bird dropped a letter into his hand and flew away without a backward glance, as if lingering would invite misfortune. The envelope was heavy, the parchment fine, sealed with a complex crest, a snake coiled around a sword, the mark of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He broke the seal and read the neat official letter. To Mr. Sagres Greengrass, in light of the significant magical incident that occurred last night in the Muggle village of Little Hangleton and the deaths of Mr. Barty Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and former Death Eater Rosier Knott, among others, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement requires your presence for questioning today at 3 p.m. Please note that the unauthorized execution of suspects in custody without trial constitutes a serious violation of Article 37 of the Wizarding Code. Furthermore, a reasonable explanation is required regarding your unauthorized use of unregistered ancient magic. Sincerely, Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Sagres folded the letter and set it aside. He had already decided privately to ignore it. Outside the window, the sun climbed above the forbidden forest and gilded the castle towers. Fatigue washed over him like a tide. A memory rose unbidden. His student days in his previous life, staying up all night in internet cafes and stumbling back to sleep in the dormitory the next morning. The tiredness felt the same. He rubbed his temples, about to lie down, when another set of wings interrupted him. A second owl flapped in, feathers ruffled, eyes watchful. Sagres took the letter from its leg and, since the bird did not leave at once, rummaged through a drawer for a bag of long-expired treats. The owl pecked twice at the stale morsels, then, with evident distaste, flapped away. The note was scribbled on coarse parchment, written in a hurried, scrawled hand. Blood seeps into the earth. Darkness revives in the sarcophagus. He will return. Those 3 lines banished any lingering drowsiness. The first name that came to Sagres' mind was Lord Voldemort. He turned over the paper, wondering who could have sent it. Within moments, he had apparated to the Little Hangleton graveyard. His mending charm had already smoothed away the signs of last night's battle. The graveyard was unnervingly quiet, as if nothing had happened. He crossed to the corner where the Death Eaters had been buried and tapped his wand. The earth moved. A pit opened, revealing several bodies, intact and as they had been, among them the drained corpse of a great snake. Everything seemed normal. Sagres moved to the place where Voldemort had fallen and pointed his wand at the ground. "Dig 3 feet deep," he commanded. The soil parted. The first layer showed nothing unusual. The second revealed dark red soil, blood-stained earth. He breathed a small sigh of relief. At least on the surface, there was no sign of foul play. Still, to be safe, he pushed further. From the tip of his wand, a pale fiendfire flickered, a living, leaping flame, and it sank into the soil. Where the fire passed, the earth hissed and the dark blood steamed and evaporated. He watched the stain, puzzling. Who had sent him that note? A warning? A prank? Or something worse? Before he could answer himself, the soil reacted. The scorched blood in the dirt began to writhe, as if touched by life. It pooled and thickened, a viscous dark red substance that moved with purpose and began drilling downward with astonishing speed. Sagres' brow tightened. He did not hesitate. "Dig 3 feet deep," he ordered again. The ground surged away like waves. He dove into the pit and waved his wand, carving a shaft downward. As he descended, the air grew colder and damp, a smell of old rot creeping in. After nearly 20 meters, the narrow shaft opened into a larger space. He had found a hidden tomb. Sagres steadied himself and took in the chamber. The crimson mass slithered ahead and vanished into shadow like a living jelly. He conjured a raven of soft white light that fluttered forward, illuminating the room. This was no ordinary burial vault. The stone chamber contained a simple bed and table, and on the table lay long-rotted parchment and quills, more like someone had lived here than someone had been laid to rest. He followed the red jelly deeper into the room. In the center sat an ancient stone coffin. Its lid bore a blurred crest, a coiled snake, unmistakably like the Gaunt family emblem. The crimson substance paused at the coffin, then squeezed through a hairline crack in the stone and disappeared inside. Sagres halted before the lid, wand leveled. A dangerous, strange magic thrummed through the tomb and prickled along his skin. He leaned forward and low and hard said, "I want to see exactly what you are."